Well, if I'd had those 13 million names, I promise you
Yeah.
that you have to ask them to do something. You can't every day be bombarding them with something, otherwise it just becomes part of the drill.
Right.
And what we did with Reagan in those big battles we had, and it was telephone. I mean, call your congressman, mail your congressman. We got the financial donors. We worked we asked them to do something. And I think what happened here is all the campaign people came to the White House. They all got the big offices. They were all running around with the czars and the cars and the drivers and all that kind of stuff. And they forgot those 13 million people that were out there who felt a part of having made this man president. And the fact that they're getting emails from, here's what we're doing today, and we appointed the new Secretary of Commerce or what have you, they could care about that. They wanted to be part of the action, and I think they failed miserably on the communication. The greatest communicator in the world, what they claimed he was, I have discovered a long time ago, communication means that someone's listening to you. And I think in the case of this president, they overused him on television, they overused him other places, but they did not basically utilize properly those 13 million people. And I promise you they're going to be harder to get a lot of them to come back.
Well, absolutely. And one of the reasons, for example, the National Rifle Association is such an enduring organization is that it deals, David, I hate even to say this, but it deals with substance and it deals with a continuing mission. We used to tell our clients on the left, the difference between the handgun control movement and the National Rifle Association is the National Rifle Association never goes home. They never quit. They never take a vacation. And they have their field programs, their conservation programs, their political programs, and they keep that substance in front of those activists. And that the question, if anything, today's activists are more demanding of quality information and accountability in terms of what they can be responsible for and make a change. So managing volunteers, giving them information, is now become more than simply licking envelopes or knocking doorbells on election day. It becomes staying involved, staying up to date with the issues, and providing them good listening and high quality feedback. And if that's not done, they move on to other things because there are too many other opportunities through the technology. But if you take a page out of the NRA and not send them money, but watch them, you can see how they do this.
But if I could just say, and at the CPAC conference that was referenced earlier, personally, the best speech I heard was by Wayne LaPierre of the NRA. He's not running for anything. He didn't have to be cautious. The NRA is sort of the tip of the spear of the conservative movement. They're really pushing the envelope. They're not going to be satisfied until every one of you is here sitting in this room with a handgun on your hip, and they don't make any bones about it. But isn't it one thing?
We might give Craver a pass.
Isn't it one thing to push for something like that in a campaign and another to govern? And is there a role for political consulting in governing that maybe is being overlooked?
I think what said a few minutes ago is that today political consultants are in on the governing, sometimes successfully and sometimes when the not just the candidate but when the elected official misuses the information and just assumes it's a campaign and for example becomes poll driven rather than principle driven. It wears pretty thin with the public fairly quickly, but the problem is this is being driven not by cynical candidates and cynical elected officials, but by something else that was mentioned, and that is that today you can't do anything that isn't public and isn't controversial the minute you do it. So politicians on the one hand have a more difficult time doing these things. Let me say something because Roger, the enduring strength of the NRA, and this is really part of what you said, is that those members out there, we have 4 million members now, and a lot more who think they're members, is that none of them think, as much as they admire Wayne and as much as they admire the power that the staff, they see the NRA really as a facilitator for their power. They know, every one of those members know that everything that the NRA does on the issues is dependent on them, not on any of us. And that's really and that's been a model for the NRA for a long, long time. And it's not only worked for us, but that's the model that Rogers is saying works, and that's what Ed says they missed in the White House.
Right. And the other, excuse me, Mark. Paul, you also ask a very good question about where does consulting leave off and governing begin? There was a great Democratic consultant organizer by the name of Paul Tully, and who's unfortunately passed away. But when Clinton asked him if he would come to the White House, he says, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I don't do governments. There is quite a difference between keeping the driving force on the issues from the outside. I mean, it's fundamentally, activism is fundamentally an outside game.
Right, that's right.
Well, and I just make 2 points, really. One is, and I would disagree to some extent about the way in which the White House, the presidents used those volunteers. I mean, the reality is, as Mario Cuomo said, there is a real difference between the poetry of campaigning and the prose of governing. And it's a lot easier to get people excited, enthusiastic, and involved for a cause, getting rid of George Bush, ending the war, whatever it is, than it is to get them excited about the compromises that one inevitably has to make to pass health care legislation. I mean, people were not, there are people who had various views about health care, and nobody was truly happy, excited, or satisfied with what emerged, and it's hard to get people excited around those things. Yet people were asked to do things, and a lot of people did do things. Hundreds of thousands and millions of people did take action as a result of the communications from the DNC, from Obama for America, and elsewhere, and were involved in the campaign that we just had. I mean, again, we didn't do all that well, but the reality is there were lots and lots of people involved through those mechanisms, both in terms of giving money and in terms of giving time and volunteer effort. But I think the question was initially about activism and what role, if that's changed. I think the most important thing that individuals do is also the most unsung, which we all know that the most effective messenger is someone you know and respect talking to you as an individual. And everything else we do is a substitute for that. The television ad is a substitute for that. The piece of direct mail is a substitute for that. The volunteer knocking on your door is a substitute for the person you know sitting down with you and having a conversation. And yet millions of those conversations go on every day. The people who sit and hold court, if you will, with their friends, family, and colleagues, and discuss around the water cooler or the barbecue or their kitchen table, discuss political issues, discuss candidates, discuss where our country is going, that's the most important activism there is. And it's the most important role that individuals do play, and that is, I think, largely unchanged throughout most of our democratic history.
And the technology gives it an opportunity. I mean, remember, Facebook is the third largest country on earth. And what we know is that people trust their friends to advance the message, the effect of the buzz, and that sort of thing. And so using activists or encouraging activists to be missionaries and recruiters for the cause or the candidate is, I think there's not enough spent time and energy and creativity spent on that.
That's what you can do.
Yeah.
That's what is to give them, and not just urge them, but give them the ammunition that they need to do that. That's
But it's also very important. It's very important to have a consistent message. Your message, NRA, is a very consistent message. You're out there every day, gun safety, whatever. It's AARP, and if anybody represents AARP, I don't mean to offend them as a member. They basically got split up in their messaging in the healthcare debate. Those over 65 who did not want the healthcare reform versus the younger ones who had an insurance. And they basically, when they sold out, they lost membership and gave Vigory and others the alternative, the opportunity to go create an alternative organization. And sometimes it's very, very important to have a consistency. People say to me all the time, why don't you get rid of the Christian right and you'll really have a Republican Party that matters? And I said, all right, why don't you get rid of African American voters, labor unions, and what have you on the other side? And then none of us will have support. You've got a base of support, and you have to communicate with those people and never take them for granted and let them feel important. One of the things I find, and I use it in the corporate world, corporations seldom ever communicate effectively with their employees. When they get in a crisis, I always say, we have to tell the employees what's going on. And they go, well, we don't want them to know what's going on. I mean, they say this. I mean, it'll get out. And I say, but they work for your company. And when it hits the front page of a paper, someone's going to come to them and ask them, and they're going to feel like a fool. I mean, they want to be a part of your organization. And I think to a certain extent, the whole methods of communications today that are so sophisticated, and you think in terms of Khomeini in 1979, they had little tapes that they passed around, little secret meetings, where today they basically, tweet and Facebook and all those kinds of things that my daughter won't let me on Facebook. I'm surprised it's that big. I keep saying, Lily, why can't I get on Facebook? She's, Dad, you don't want to be on Facebook. You're too old for it. And I saw her picture the other day on Facebook that someone showed me, and now I know why Dad wasn't supposed to be looking on that. Maybe I don't want to know. And I think going back to the point, when I started in politics with UNRWA said there's three things about this business that you always have to keep in your head. You have to find your voters. You have to communicate with your voters. You have to get them to the polls on election. If you're doing anything else but those three things, you basically aren't doing your mission. Now, there's so many more ways to find our voters today, the sophistication of what have you. There's so many more ways to communicate with the voters, and there's so many different ways of getting them to the polls. You don't even have to go to the polls anymore with the absentees. But those three things are still the structure of our business. And if we're not doing that and not doing that well, we're not going to win.
Okay, so we've talked a lot. We've touched, for obvious reasons, on technology a lot. So let's talk a little bit about technology and technique and the impact of technology on your particular areas of expertise. Roger, as a direct mail pioneer, what is the future of direct mail in an online world?
Well, direct mail itself in an online world is very important. It is still the workhorse for bringing in money and for building certain types of trust. So don't look for direct mail to go away probably any time before the post office goes away, which may come sooner. The secret is integrating the other channels of communication with mail and mail with the other channels, so that it's what Ed was talking about, the synergy and reinforcement of the same message going multiple ways. We know, for example, that the annual renewal rates of political and advocacy organizations improve by 25% if a person is getting both direct mail and online communications. Well, that's a significant difference. I was looking at a data dump this morning of a client to see how many members they had who had Facebook and Twitter followers greater than 1,000. So you can look at a database and see how many followers your folks have, and decide these are the people who are going to be the missionaries, these are the people I want to follow up with the mail, or these are the people I want to send messages to their friends as a follow-up to whatever. So the technology really enables you to do what we used to be able to do in direct mail, but far better, because direct mail you have to wait for ink to dry, you have to wait for the post office to deliver it. It's not interactive, and now we can add to that the basic I to you communication, which is the magic of direct mail with these other technologies.
Ed, you touched on it a second ago. Technology and I guess California was, and maybe it was the Republicans in California who sort of pioneered absentee ballot as a way of winning elections in a new way. Now you've got permanent absentee ballot lists, and you have the technology that allows you to better track whether people are using the absentee ballot. And I'm under the impression you can actually know from the Postal Service whether the ballot that you got somebody to fill out has actually been mailed in or not. So what impact does that technology have on the actual voting and in getting people to support your candidate?